There are moments in life when the world feels too loud, too fast, and too demanding. The screens, the conversations, the notifications, the opinions, they all come rushing in, day after day, until you can barely hear your own thoughts. But then comes a quiet moment, a pause, a stillness. And it is in that rare silence that something shifts. You begin to hear the soft voice inside, the one you've ignored for so long. You begin to feel what your soul has been aching to express. It is in this silence that you finally come face to face with yourself. Not the version the world sees, but the real, raw, unfiltered you. Being alone with yourself is not about isolation. It is not about being cut off from the world or rejecting others. It's about finally giving your soul the attention it deserves. When you are alone, you begin to see your life through a different lens. The masks drop, the performances end, and what's left is your truth. You begin to ask questions you had no time for before. Who am I really? What am I chasing? What do I need? And most importantly, what have I become? In solitude, you discover that your worth was never in your achievements, your appearance, or how many people liked your posts. It was in your sincerity, your humility, your kindness, and your heart's connection with Allah. When you're alone, you begin to understand that peace doesn't come from people, it comes from within, and that the storms outside cannot shake the calm that lives in a heart grounded in faith. Being alone also brings clarity. You begin to recognize the relationships that drain you and the habits that hurt you. You become aware of the pain you've buried, the dreams you've delayed, and the parts of yourself you've forgotten. But instead of running away this time, you sit with it. You let the tears fall, you let the pain rise, and in that raw honesty, healing begins. You stop needing the world to understand you, because you finally understand yourself. And as you sit alone, maybe under a night sky or in your room with a quiet heart, you remember Allah. You whisper to Him. You cry to Him. And you realize you were never truly alone. He was there all along, waiting for you to pause, to breathe, to return. That is the power of being alone with yourself. It's not an escape. It's a return to your soul, a return to your Lord, a return to peace. The world rarely gives us time to just sit and listen. Not to music, not to conversations, but to something far deeper, to our own soul. The noise around us constantly demands attention. It tells us what we should be, how we should act, what success looks like, and even how to feel. But when we intentionally step back, when we choose to be alone with ourselves, something beautiful begins to happen. The silence that once seemed uncomfortable slowly becomes a doorway into parts of ourselves we had ignored for too long. It's in that silence that we hear our thoughts echo more clearly. Our emotions rise more honestly, and our heart begins to speak without fear. Many people associate silence with emptiness. They assume that being alone means being lonely, broken, or incomplete. But the truth is quite the opposite. Silence is an emptiness. It's space. And space is where creation begins. Think of a garden. Before a seed can grow, there must be a quiet, still space for it to be planted. That's what solitude does to the heart. It gives it space to breathe, to reflect, to reset. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, opinions, and distractions, you can't truly hear yourself. You can't process the pain or the hopes or even the questions hiding beneath the surface. Being alone with yourself allows you to meet your truest self. You see your flaws without judgment, your dreams without filters, and your faith without distractions. And in that space, you begin to realize that your worth never came from what people said about you. It came from the sincerity of your intentions and your connection to Allah. When the world's voices fade, the voice of your fitra, your pure inner nature, begins to rise. That's when you remember why you were created, what you truly long for, and what actually brings peace. So next time you feel the urge to fill your silence with noise, pause, let the quiet speak, let your soul breathe, because silence isn't something to escape, it's something to embrace. In that stillness, you'll find answers, you'll find clarity, and most of all, you'll find yourself. You heal when you stop running from yourself. In a world that teaches us to stay busy, to stay distracted, and to never stop scrolling, we often forget how to be still. We forget how to sit with our own thoughts, to confront our own pain, and to truly listen to what our heart is trying to say. Instead, we run from one plan to another, one notification to the next, hoping that by staying distracted, the ache inside us will fade, but it doesn't. It waits. Because healing doesn't come from avoiding what hurts. Healing comes when you finally turn around and face it. When you allow yourself to be alone with yourself, you create a space for honesty. And honesty is the first step to healing. In that solitude, you no longer need to pretend to be okay. You no longer need to smile for the world when you're breaking inside. You get to ask the hard questions. Why am I hurting? What am I afraid of? What am I carrying that I haven't let go? And in those moments, when there is no one to impress and no one to perform for, you begin to see yourself not with criticism, but with compassion. Healing is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's often silent, slow, and sacred. It happens when you cry in sujud, when you whisper your fears to Allah, when you admit to yourself that you're not as strong as you pretend to be. It happens when you stop numbing your feelings and finally feel them. The pain, the regret, the sadness, all of it. And in that process, something powerful unfolds. You begin to grow, you begin to soften, and most of all, you begin to reconnect with the version of yourself that you lost along the way. Being alone with yourself isn't about isolation, it's about restoration. It's about giving your heart a chance to breathe. It's about pausing long enough to realize that healing doesn't come from the world's distractions, but from Allah's mercy and your own willingness to surrender. So be alone, not because you're weak, but because you're ready to heal. Because you finally understand that real strength comes from facing your pain and letting it transform you. You learn who you are without the noise of others. It's easy to get lost in the expectations of people around us, family, friends, society, and even social media. They paint pictures of what we should be, how we should act, what success should look like. Slowly, without realizing it, we start molding ourselves into what they expect, not into who we truly are. But the moment you step away from all that noise and sit quietly with yourself, you begin to feel a shift. In that stillness, when there's no one to please, no one to impress, and no one to compare yourself to, your real identity starts to surface. Being alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means giving yourself the permission to be authentic. You begin to ask questions you might have never dared to ask. What do I truly love? What do I fear? What matters to me beyond what the world says should matter? You start recognizing your habits, your patterns, and your inner voice, unfiltered by outside approval. In solitude, there's no crowd to follow. So you stop walking someone else's path and begin discovering your own. You also begin to see how much of your personality has been shaped by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. But when you're alone, those fears slowly begin to fade. There's no one watching, no one grading your every move. It's just you. And that's when you begin to feel the freedom to just be. You laugh without guilt, you cry without shame, and you reflect without interruption. The most beautiful part is, as you discover who you are without others, you begin to realize your need for the one who created you. You recognize that your worth is not in how people see you, but in how sincerely you connect with Allah. You begin to shape your identity not by the trends around you, but by the guidance of your faith and the whispers of your heart. That's where true confidence is born, not in validation from the outside, but in peace from within. And that kind of self-knowledge, that kind of grounding, only comes when you have the courage to be alone with yourself. You strengthen your connection with Allah when you're alone. In the quiet moments when no one is watching, no one is listening, and no one is expecting anything from you. That's when the most sincere conversations happen. The world often makes us feel like we need to perform faith in front of others, to show piety in a certain way, or to appear religious enough. But true faith isn't built in front of crowds. It grows in solitude. It grows when you're up late and whispering your worries in sujood. It grows when tears fall silently down your cheeks and there's no one to wipe them but Allah. Solitude strips away distractions. When the noise of the world fades, so does the competition for your attention. That's when your heart can finally focus on its creator. You begin to feel the weight of your own soul. You begin to hear the quiet tug of your fitrah, calling you back to the one who never left you. It's in those alone moments that you realize how often you rely on people for comfort, when it is Allah who has always been your refuge. In silence, you remember Him not just with your tongue, but with your whole being. It is in solitude that your du'as become more real. You stop reciting memorized phrases and start pouring your heart out in your own words. You ask for forgiveness, not because it's part of a routine, but because you feel the distance and you long to come back. You beg for guidance, not just for the next step, but for your entire journey. There's no fear of being judged in those conversations. No pressure to say the perfect thing, just raw, real connection. That's the kind of bond that shapes your faith in a way no lecture or video ever could. And the more you sit with yourself, the more you realize you were never really alone. Because in every moment of silence, there was a listener. In every breath of reflection, there was mercy. And in every tear that fell unseen, there was divine attention. When you are alone with yourself and you fill that space with remembrance of Allah, you come out not just more peaceful, but more powerful, more grounded, and more aware of the one who has always known you better than you know yourself. You stop seeking validation when you're alone with yourself. In the silence of solitude, something powerful happens. You begin to break the habit of living for other people's approval. Most of us, whether we admit it or not, spend so much of our lives trying to be accepted. We filter our words. We modify our dreams. We even shrink our truths just to fit into someone else's definition of enough. But when you remove the crowd, the eyes watching, and the expectations weighing you down, you start to hear a different voice, your own. Suddenly, the pressure to impress fades away. You no longer feel the need to post, to prove, or to perform. You begin to ask yourself questions that matter. Am I proud of who I'm becoming? Does my heart feel peace when no one else is clapping? Do I even recognize the person I've been trying to be? These questions are not easy, but they're honest. And honesty is where self-worth is born. Not the kind of worth that rises and falls with likes, compliments, or applause, but the kind that comes from being true to who you are, even when no one's watching. You also begin to realize how much of your anxiety came from trying to measure up to invisible standards. Society tells you what success looks like, how beauty is defined, and what kind of life is worth celebrating. But when you're alone, you're free to define those things for yourself. You start to value character over image, sincerity over popularity, and inner peace over public approval. That shift doesn't just change how you see the world, it changes how you see yourself. Most importantly, you begin to seek only the validation that truly matters, Allah's. When you pray alone, give quietly, or hold yourself accountable in secret, that's when sincerity is tested and strengthened. You no longer care if the world claps, as long as your actions are seen by the one who created you. And that kind of freedom, the freedom from needing others to tell you that you're enough, is only found in solitude. When you choose to be alone with yourself, you give your soul the space to finally stop performing and start living. You discover that your worth was never in the spotlight, but in the silence, where you remembered who you are and who you belong to. You learn to face your wounds when you're alone with yourself. In the chaos of everyday life, it's easy to hide behind the noise. We stay busy so we don't have to feel. We scroll endlessly, laugh loudly, and stay surrounded by people just so we don't have to confront the ache buried inside. But the truth is, what we avoid stays. Pain doesn't vanish just because we cover it. It sits quietly in the background, shaping our fears, influencing our choices, and silently affecting how we see ourselves and others. That's why being alone is so important, because when the noise stops, the truth begins to surface. In solitude, you no longer have the distractions that help you run from your past. You begin to notice the things you've buried, the heartbreak you never healed from, the mistakes you never forgave yourself for, the questions you never dared to ask. And though it may feel overwhelming at first, this process is the beginning of true healing. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to face. Being alone allows you to sit with your pain, not to drown in it, but to understand it, to see where it came from, what it taught you, and what you need to release. You also begin to speak more kindly to yourself. Without the outside world feeding your insecurities, you learn to listen to your own voice. And eventually, you learn to change the way it speaks. Instead of criticizing yourself for your scars, you start to honor the strength it took to survive. You begin to see your pain as part of your journey, not a flaw to hide. That shift doesn't just comfort you. And as you sit with your wounds, you start inviting Allah into that space. You realize that you don't have to fix everything alone. That even in your weakest, most broken moments, His mercy is greater than your mistakes, and His love is stronger than your shame. In those moments, you don't just heal, you reconnect. You reconnect with yourself and with your Creator. And that kind of healing is deep, it's quiet, but it's also lasting, because it wasn't built on pretending you were okay. It was built on the courage to be alone, to be honest, and to let Allah into the parts of you that no one else ever sees. When you choose to be alone with yourself, you're not escaping the world, you're returning to what matters most. In solitude, you discover the truths that get drowned in daily noise. You realize how often you've lived for others, how much of your identity has been shaped by opinions, expectations, and distractions. But in silence, those voices fade, and what's left is you, raw, real, and deeply in need of connection with your Creator. It's in these quiet moments that the deepest healing begins. Not the surface level healing that comes from time, but the kind that comes from turning inward and upward towards Allah. This journey of being alone with yourself is not about loneliness. It's about presence. It's about sitting with your thoughts and finally listening. listening to the parts of you that need compassion, the memories that need closure, and the dreams that need renewal. It's about letting yourself feel instead of numbing, reflect instead of running, and pray instead of pretending you're okay. And in all of this, you start building something that can never be shaken. Inner strength that doesn't come from people, peace that doesn't come from circumstances, and faith that doesn't depend on approval. You also begin to see how Allah never left you. Every tear you cried alone was seen, every silent prayer was heard, every battle you fought inside your chest, He knew. And when you remember that, solitude stops being scary. It becomes sacred. It becomes your place of growth, of prayer, of finding purpose again. It becomes the space where you realign your life, not to please people, but to please the one who created you. With love, for a reason. So thank you for taking this journey of reflection, of courage, of quiet transformation. Thank you for honoring your soul enough to spend time alone with it. And thank you for remembering that healing doesn't always happen in crowds, it happens in stillness. May you continue to find strength in your silence, peace in your prayers, and love in your connection with Allah. The world may pull you in 100 directions, but when you come back to yourself and to Him, you come home. Stay connected, stay sincere, and never be afraid to be alone with yourself. That's where the real light is found.